Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome an accomplished Indian Army veteran who's also an author from Chandigarh, India, Major General Neeraj Bali, Sena Medal, retired. General Bali, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
General Bali is an author of the book titled The Winning Culture, Lessons from the Indian Army to Transform Your Business. He's currently director of the Chandigarh-based Gyan Chakra think tank, which is sponsored by the Indian Army. So, Neeraj, let me start with the first question. What inspired you to write The Winning Culture, Lessons from the Indian Army to Transform Your Business?
All right. So if I was to try and pick a single moment when this thought triggered my mind, I probably will not be being honest. But the closest I can come to that is back in 2016 or 17, I was talking to some people in IIM Ahmedabad. I'd gone to deliver a talk. And one young student got up and asked me a question. He said, "You guys in the army come from the same demographic as the rest of us, same villages, same towns, same financial anxieties, same education. How is it that you change so much? You don't have a bonus at the end of the year, and you don't have an appraisal like that, and you're willing to die. What changes?" Now, I've thrown this question back at many audience since then. I have rarely got a correct answer. The correct answer is that there is really no difference between people who join the army and those who are outside. Certainly, it's not that thing called patriotism. I never heard that word in 40 years of my service in the army. Nobody talks about that. The difference is culture. It is that silent force that drives every organization, that drives all individuals, makes us sometimes do extraordinary things, even though we are ordinary, and sometimes, of course, makes us do work below our potential. And that is the thought that came to my mind at that point of time, that Indian Army has got such a robust culture. Is there a case to point out a few lessons that the Army knows instinctively to the rest of the business world? And by the way, at that point of time, I was CEO of a company. I've been CEO of two different companies, including one engineering company. And I'd seen this at first hand, that there is stuff from the Army that can be used outside. And that's what got me thinking. So rest is 4 years of work.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing this. So my next question is, can you explain the core principles from the Indian Army that can be applied to business culture?
Well, I don't know whether I'm talking about the principles, but I can tell you there are some core differences which can easily be picked up in spite of the fact that the business is a different environment. I'm completely conscious of that. And it is not my case that anybody outside should try to copy the army the way it is. That'll be a nonsensical idea. But there are certain universal truths, certain universal values that you can pick. The first and the foremost is, in the army, the selection is primarily character-based. I think it's a trick that the corporate sector misses out on. The army also looks at your background and your knowledge and all of that, blah, blah, but it primarily focuses on your attitude, your character. What are you going to do in the battlefield? And I think that's something that the corporate sector can hugely benefit from. The second is the leadership that exists in the army. The leadership in the army is relational. That is one seminal difference with the world outside. Outside, everything is transactional. You are in my team, I'm going to deal with you, I'm going to get work done, I'm going to succeed, the team will do well, get a bonus. In the army, everything is based on relations. You connect with people, you worry about their growth, you worry about their families, you worry about their well-being, you worry about their safety. And that leadership is of a qualitatively different kind. The third very important thing that can be picked up is, in the army, every individual down to a Jawan understands what his role is and what great contribution he's making to the cause. I've seen many people in the corporate, they just think it's a 9-to-5 job. Nobody's ever told them. Let's take the case of a receptionist or even a guy standing on the door. He contributes to the marketing, to the brand building of the company. Nobody's ever told him that. All right. He's a very important cog in that wheel.
Yeah.
So I can tell you stories if we have time later of how every individual down to a cook understands that his job is not chapati making. He is raising the morale of the boys because then they will go out and kill terrorists. So his contribution is in killing terrorists.
Amazing.
And when you look at your job like that and your role like that, it's a fundamental difference. And there are many other things which I can talk about as the time
Coming back
goes
to
on.
what you said right in the beginning, and I agree with you. When we spoke earlier, I told you that my father was a very senior retired army officer. So I understand
Yes.
the
Yes.
values and the culture that comes with the army. But I'm interested to learn a little more about what you said about recruitment being character-based. Can you help me understand this with an example?
Look, first of all, let me confess that there is a difference between how, and at the time when people are recruited in the army, they are new guys, they're coming from the world outside. In the corporate sector, there is a lot of lateral entry.
Yeah.
Most of it is lateral entry. So the conditions are not the same. Look at my example. I joined the army when I was 16. I had never spoken one complete cogent sentence of English in my life. I came from a Punjabi medium school. The first time I spoke English was when I was interviewed.
Wow.
But nobody bothered. Nobody bothered. Nobody worried about the fact that I didn't have that background. All right. They just looked at, so the army looks at from three different angles. There is an interviewing officer who looks at you, your whole life story, and you know what sort of attitude you have. There is a psychologist who does this work independently. And there is a GTO or a ground training officer who looks at you, how you behave in a team, how you interact with other people, and how you do physical tasks, how innovative you are. Now, all three vote separately. They do not consult each other. If you need all three votes to get in. All right.
Okay.
Look at where the bulk of the pressure is. Now, I understand in the corporate sector also there is, all kinds of tests these days done to assess people's suitability. And I also see the challenge. It's not possible, even if you do multiple rounds of interview, to really judge a man's character. It's very hard. Okay. But I think this is one thing we should all focus more on. Not so much about his knowledge. You can give him knowledge. You can even build his experience. But if he hasn't got the attitude, I'm sorry, he's going to sink the job.
Great response. You also spoke about relational versus transactional, and to be able to understand one's role very clearly. And I think these two are very clear. But my next question for you, Neeraj, is how can businesses balance short-term goals with long-term vision as the military does?
Okay. So the first thing that business must be genuinely concerned about is a value system. Now, this is not a sweet treacle word, this value system.
Yeah.
Value system is not what you splash on a poster on the wall. It is what you genuinely believe and what you follow. Once you have a value system, then whether you're chasing a short-term goal or a long-term goal, you won't falter on the basics. All right. The army is pretty clear about what the values are. So you can, and in that value, you always look at things in the long term first, then you look at anything else. The second part is in the army, there is a relentless focus on developing a culture.
Right.
The focus is on preserving a culture. All right. Outside, every MD I've spoken to, every CEO I've spoken to, and I've been one myself, talks about a culture. But genuinely, very few people understand where is it coming from, how to tame this animal, how to tweak the stuff. Whereas in the army, by adhering to tradition, norms, I was listening to General Dogra's podcast with you the other day. He talked about Naam, Namak, Nishan. Things like this are ingrained in us.
Correct.
So you follow all of that, and then you don't falter whether it's a short-term thing or a long-term thing. The third is that you build such strong teamwork, which starts with the National Defense Academy, right? So at no point do you falter whether you're just chasing something which is to be achieved in 2 days or something to be achieved in the long term. Having said that, let me just say this as a conclusion. Every business is dealing with a lot of stuff.
Correct.
A lot of constraints, a lot of factors. You're chasing a top line. You're concerned with your bottom line. You're worried about your profitability. You're worried about compliances. You're worried about employee satisfaction. You're worried about stakeholders. You're worried about customer complaints. You're worried about quality. so on and so forth. It's a whole big circle if you can draw of things that you're battling with. You know what is going to determine what you're going to win or lose? What are you putting in the center of that circle?
Right.
There will be something that you will have to focus entirely on. So if you're a service company, for example, my thought would be you focus on service, no matter what you do, whether it is short term or long term, you're going to go well. If you're a manufacturing company, focus on quality, you're going to do well. So it's stuff like that. In the army, people instinctively know what is at the center.
Correct.
You know, what victory to chase.
Correct. So, in the private sector, culture has normally been defined as the way we do things here.
Right.
How would you say the army or the military or the defense services would define culture?
Culture is exactly that. Culture is not anything different from what you just said. You see, culture is what we collectively do.
Right.
It is how our brains have been programmed to function in a particular organization. Let's take the case of a government office, and I don't mean to play down any government office's achievements. There are some great ones.
Yeah.
But if you look at some of the terrible ones, when you walk in at 10 o'clock, the man comes at 11, he doesn't talk to you till 11:30, and then he says, which file? Come back after a week. I'm too busy. There are files and files, and you see there are files piled all over the place. Why is that happening? Because it works for him. That is working for him. Culture is what individuals come to believe will work for their self-interest. He's going to get his pay and pension. Now, this is not going to happen in a corporate entity. It's not going to happen in a modern bank, for example, where competitiveness is a different kind. It is what you put in the center, what you are going to pursue, what you are going to push, what you're going to reward, what you're going to punish is going to become culture. Culture is, as I said before, is not something you write on a wall. It is something which people see happen. I'll give you an example. Too many employees tell me, whenever I go to another company and I'm a consultant to a few, they say, sir, hamari company mein there is too much politics. There is too much gossip. Why is it so? Because it's being permitted. Because there is a perception, perhaps, that unless you indulge in gossip and indulge in politics, you're not going to succeed. Right? So that is what gives rise to culture. So culture is what you allow to happen, which sets in, which people perceive to be in their self-interest.
Great response. Thank you. My next question is that, uncertainty is a constant in any business. And not only do you in the army lead lives of uncertainty, especially when you're in border areas, etc., but how does the army meet the challenge of uncertainty? Because you seem to live it all the time.
Right. There was a dichotomy in my own head for many years, which got sorted out when I was writing the book. It was this. You are an army child, so army lives in neat places, in complete orderliness.
Yeah.
Whatever we do is orderly, is in straight lines. Everything is in place. Even our parties are organized like that. And there is nothing which is chaotic. Everything is in time, for example. Now, I used to wonder, how is it that an army which is trained to live only orderly lives deals with uncertainty and chaos suddenly during war? And I've commanded an anti-terrorist battalion, so I know how good we are at it. Now, the answer was given to me by an ex-chief, General Malik, when I interviewed him. He said, look, when you're orderly, when you're process-driven, when you're a man of habits, in your mind, a lot of things are completely sorted out. Come the uncertainty and come the crisis, your mind has got enough bandwidth to deal with the crisis. It's not grappling with the day-to-day stuff. It's not grappling with what should I do about this. Some things are completely taken care of. So that's one reason, one way we are dealing with uncertainty, which is why we are good at it. The second is the corporate sector tends to treat risk very differently from how the army does. In the corporate sector, people understand risk. They take risks, of course, but it's seen as something somewhat negative. In the army, we are preparing ourselves for risk. We are embracing risk. We are looking for risk because we know without risk, there is going to be no victory. Right. So in order to create that, we have created an ecosystem of teamwork, of leadership, of tactics, which all help us while taking a risk. So, come the day when there is uncertainty, you are able to handle all of that so much better.
Very well said. The next question is on accountability and responsibility. And one of the things that has often been discussed in the corporate sector is how do you ensure people are accountable for what they are doing? And yet in the army, it is so clearly defined. So my question is, how can businesses instill a sense of accountability and responsibility in their employees?
First of all, like I said, every employee must understand the contribution he's making. We never articulate it. We never celebrate people for it. We never tell them what an important job they are doing. Because a man doesn't feel that he's doing anything important. He feels that, he's just a cog in the wheel if he does something. Take a sales guy, for example. He goes out in the market. He learns something amazing about the competition. But he thinks, who will I tell this? How does it matter? This is a tidbit. He doesn't come back and report the matter to anyone in the company, which could help the strategy of the company itself. All right. So first is to make people feel that they are important, that they are doing a very terrific job. The second is we create an ecosystem or an environment where initiative doesn't bloom. In order to have accountability, you have to allow people initiative. Now, how do you do that? One of the difficulties that managers talk about is, sir, people make mistakes and I can't do anything because, if I say something, if I'm nasty with him, he's going to run away or he's going to stop working or, he won't listen to me. What do I do? In that statement lies the secret of accountability. What is that? In the army, you are absolutely clear that when a man makes the error of judgment, he fires at a militant, but unfortunately, there's a collateral damage. He kills somebody else. Even though he took every precaution, he made every effort, it was an error of judgment. The army is going to do its best to protect him. All errors of judgment are either overlooked or left off with a little, counseling. All errors of omission and laziness, which are the bulk of errors in the corporate sector and everywhere because of human nature, are you get ticked off, you're briefed, you are rebriefed, you are guided, you are trained, and if you still don't improve, then you're shown the door, in the corporate. The third type of error is the error of intention. In the army, for example, you go out and mess with a woman, you are going to get court-martialed.
Correct.
Try to make money, you will be court-martialed. Imagine making money. People have been court-martialed for signing a wrong bar check of 6 rupees.
Yeah.
Imagine that vis-a-vis killing somebody by mistake, which is error of judgment, where you are being overlooked. This is the secret. The corporate sector must understand and teach that in order to produce tigers in your company, in order to rear tigers, you've got to start overlooking errors of judgment. You've got to the leaders have to start saying, doesn't matter. Okay, Anna, I'm here. I will take care of that. Because if you don't do this, then you are producing rabbits when you really want tigers.
Very well said. There's another very interesting aspect from the army, and that is the family in every army officer's life. The families play a very important role in the organization, and I've often seen how strong the Army Wives Welfare Association, for example, is. Is there a lesson to learn for the corporate sector from the army?
There are two big tricks the corporate sector is missing. One is family, and the other one you briefly mentioned initially about storytelling or something. I'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Look, it's not just the Army Wives Welfare Association. I know of at least 50 cases or maybe more, and I researched many of them for my book, and I reproduced their stories, where a lady having lost her husband has literally fought her way into the army to become an officer.
Right.
Please remember that there is no quota system in the army. There is no such thing as, husband dies and wife gets a job. You have to go through training. You have to apply. You have to be fit. In one case, in the case of Colonel Santosh Mahadik, who died, he was a para officer. His wife was a CEO's wife. hugely over age. There was no way she was going to join the army, but she went right up to probably the Raksha Mantri or wherever, got a waiver, joined the training. She told me she nearly died doing the training, and she became an officer. Another case, and I'm just giving you some cases, but otherwise there are literally dozens of cases. A young girl called Nitika Kaul, who used to work for TCS, and TCS had promised her a posting in London. She was doing very well. Married a gentleman, Major Vibhuti Tondial. Within 10 months, the man died in an operation. She had never been to an army unit. So when she joined the army with great effort, she chucked up TCS job. When I interviewed her, I said, look, it's a terrific story, but it's not a story about culture. You didn't even know the army's culture. So why did you join the army? She said, no, sir, I wouldn't have. But my husband was the only son of an army parent. Wow. And my mother-in-law requested me. She said, I lost my son. Now you go complete the job. Okay. I have a coursemate, Wing Commander Girish, and his wife Meghna. They're pretty famous on the Twitter. They lost their only son Akshay about 6-7 years ago in an operation. And they made it their life's mission to help every child who wants to join army who doesn't have the wherewithal. Okay. Now tell me, which is the organization where you can draw any parallel like this, where you have grievous injury and loss, and you're still supporting the organization? You know why? Because army in turn supports the families. Army takes care of families, not only when people are alive, even when people have passed away. When we have a raising day, a founders day, ladies, widows whose husbands have died, say 20 years ago, are still invited to the founders day. They're still part of the family. Yeah. Right. So that is what the trick about the family, which the corporate sector. Now, let me hasten to add, people tell me when I talk about this, they say, no, but corporate sector is different. We just come and go. Right. We come and go in the army too. We also have postings. In any case, what will you lose if you integrated your families? Absolutely. You started inviting them for functions. You stop this business of only having stag cocktails and stag going to the bar because you've achieved a success and invited families. What would you lose? You have nothing to lose but everything to gain.
Very well said. So time for 2 more questions. What is the role of storytelling in maintaining high levels of motivation in the army? And what can we learn from this experience of storytelling?
So this is a strange phenomena which even caught my eye much later, that we in the army thrive on stories. We not only tell stories when you're sitting in the bar, we're talking about a unit and talking about what happened in the operation and what did a veteran do. We have a daily digest, we have a war diary, we have museums, we have war memorials. We talk about these things on the Founders Day. Collectively, this gives you a sense of pride and continuity. Let us say, any corporate company decided to start collecting stories of their success. Yeah. Sure, they won't be as dramatic as the army stories, but sometimes they won a great project, or I know the story of Megamart, which achieved 100 crores in a year when they used to have a target of 100 crores in the whole, in a month, when they had a target earlier for the whole year. These are great stories. Yeah. If you collected these stories and you repeated them to each other, to your people, you will develop a sense of pride. And even when people change, it will give a continuity to the culture. I'm going to very quickly, in a couple of minutes, tell you a little story, and that'll prove this point. Kargil, 2 Rajrif, is attacking a place called Lone Hill. It's pitch dark. The attack is being led by a guy called Major Saxena. They're moving up. They literally cannot find a foothold to go up. Pakistanis are firing from top. They try various attempts. They lose an officer. They lose a couple of boys. One boy gets his face shot off. And then suddenly something dramatic happens. The Pakistanis start rolling boulders from top. So all you can hear is this loud noise, and you don't know what is happening. It's pitch dark. And Major Saxena says, I saw one Jawan disappear. Then the second Jawan disappear. Boys were getting hit. They were being thrown hundreds of feet down. Somebody with a broken shoulder, somebody with a broken hip. They're crying in pain. And finally, he was left with just a handful. And at this point, he started climbing down, started giving morphine injections, spoke to his CEO on the radio set, got a few more people, and started helping alleviate their pain as much as he could. And I asked him a question. I said, no, it must be 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. It's pitch dark. There is firing happening. Your people are dying. People are crying out for their mothers. What was going through your mind? Tell me what was going through your mind. He said, sir, to tell you the truth, there was only one thought. Whenever we sit in 2 Rajrif, we have only one story to tell. 2 Rajrif has never lost a battle in 175 years. And I said, it can't start with me.
Wow.
They still climbed. They still eliminated the Pakistanis. They still captured it.
Amazing.
That's the power of the narrative. Absolutely. That's the power of the story.
Absolutely. And this kind of a story sends a shiver down your spine in any case. Thank you for narrating the story, Neeraj. And my last question to you, based on all the research that you've done for your book, what advice would you give to business leaders looking to transform their organizational culture?
My first and foremost advice to all business leaders, particularly those who run family businesses, is this. Culture flows from top.
Yeah.
It does not gravitate against, it doesn't move like reverse osmosis against gravity.
Correct.
So stop saying my culture is not good, because you are responsible.
Correct.
It's coming from you. First, unless you acknowledge that truth, nothing is going to happen. Second, you need to identify which part of the culture requires a change. You can do this yourself, but ideally you should get an outsider who can do a quantitative analysis. I'm not a great fan of quantitative analysis, but also qualitative analysis. Wherever I've done this, I go and talk to a whole lot of people, and a lot of stuff comes out. And some of that stuff is at variance with what the management is thinking. So you identify what you need to change. After you've identified, you communicate clearly what is about to change. The fourth thing you do is you then tweak every SOP, every procedure, every norm, every tradition, every bit of symbolism, even the way you give awards, who you give awards to, based on the culture you want to follow. Your culture cannot stand in contradiction with your procedures. You cannot say, I want to develop a sense of urgency and timeliness, and people who are coming late, there's no penalty. All right? You need to do that. Next is, as a leader, finally, it is your example which is going to play a very long role.
Right.
Last point I want to say is persist. Culture is a very obdurate animal. You can't just, fling it on the ground and change culture. It takes literally months and years, because people have got used to a certain way of working. Mark Twain once said, and I'm just paraphrasing from my mind, he said this about habits, but I'll talk about culture. Culture is culture. To be coaxed downstairs one step at a time, not to be thrown out of the window. You can't.
Yeah.
All right. So persist and change. And final point I will say this is, if there is one part of culture you want to focus on, just one part, please focus on leading by example. Instill it in your people. Everything else doesn't cut. Lead by example.
Well said. Great response. And on that note, Neeraj, thank you for speaking to me about your amazing journey, about your amazing book. I think we covered a lot of ground about what lessons we can draw from the Army. I think you've done an incredible amount of research. I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out General Bali's book, The Winning Culture, Lessons from the Indian Army to Transform Our Business. Thank you for speaking to me, and all the very best to you.
Thank you very much, Ashutosh. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.